After waiting for many days for a Christmas invitation from my son, I finally called him myself. His words hit me like ice. "Mom, we just want Christmas with the real family this year." My hands trembled around the phone. All those years of late nights, skipped meals, and tireless sacrifices. Forgotten. I felt like a stranger in my own family's life. For a moment, I sat there stunned, the room around me fading into silence. But deep down, a quiet thought began to grow. A thought that this wouldn't end with just heartbreak. This Christmas, they would learn that the woman they tried to ignore was far stronger than they ever imagined. And what I had planned would change everything. I had always believed Christmas was the one time of year when families set aside their differences, when laughter filled the house, the smell of cinnamon rolls mixed with pine needles, and love felt warm enough to melt even the coldest winter night. For decades, I poured my heart into it. Every December, I became the keeper of tradition. The stockings, the ornaments passed down from my grandmother, the silly matching pajamas. Even when money was tight, I made sure my children experienced magic on Christmas morning. And now, at 50 years old, I thought I had earned something simple: to sit at my son's table, watch my grandchildren tear open their presents, and hear them call me Grandma with eyes sparkling. So I waited. The first week of December passed, then the second. No phone call, no text, not even a message that said, "Mom, we're busy, but don't worry, we'll see you soon." I told myself, they must be caught up in the holiday rush. Maybe they're planning a surprise. But in the quiet of my house, with the lights on the tree glowing faintly against the dark window, I felt it, that heavy ache in the pit of my stomach. A mother knows. We can sense it before words are spoken, before doors are closed, before love turns into something sharp. I kept telling myself, maybe they're just busy, maybe I'm overthinking. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was being forgotten. Not by strangers, not by distant relatives, but by my own child. And in that moment, I realized this Christmas would be unlike any other. The silence was unbearable. Every day I'd glance at my phone, waiting for a message, a little ping, a sign that they hadn't forgotten me. By the third week of December, I couldn't take it anymore. So I picked up the phone and dialed my son's number, my hands trembling, as if I were some unwanted guest, asking for permission to enter my own family's life. He answered after a long pause. "Hey, Mom." His voice was flat, cold, not the voice of the little boy who used to run into my arms after school, clutching finger paintings and asking me to hang them on the fridge. I tried to sound cheerful. "Sweetheart, I was just wondering what the plan is for Christmas this year. Should I bring my famous pecan pie? The grandkids always." And then, silence. A silence so sharp it cut through me. Finally, he sighed. "Mom, listen. We just want Christmas with the real family this year." The words hung in the air. The real family. As if I were some stranger. As if my decades of sacrifice, working 2 jobs, skipping meals so he could eat, patching up scraped knees, holding him through heartbreak, meant nothing. I felt the blood drain from my face. I wanted to ask him what he meant, to beg him to take it back, but my voice caught in my throat. I thought of all the Christmas mornings when I stayed up until dawn, wrapping gifts I could barely afford, making sure he never felt the poverty I carried on my shoulders. I thought of the nights I cried silently, so he wouldn't see, so he would believe in joy, in family, in love. And now, this, the real family. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, desperate for him to laugh, to say it was a cruel joke, that of course I was welcome. But all I heard was the background noise of children's laughter, my grandchildren, while I sat alone in my quiet house. My lips trembled. I see. Well, Merry Christmas, sweetheart." And before he could respond, I hung up. I sat there for a long time, the silence louder than any scream. I wasn't just excluded. I was erased. After that call, I sat in the stillness of my living room. The glow of the Christmas lights blurred through my tears, and my mind drifted. back to the years when life was nothing but sacrifice. I remembered the nights I worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices after hours, serving coffee in the mornings, so that he could have shoes without holes and a hot meal waiting for him when he came home from school. There were nights when my body ached so badly I thought I would collapse, but the sound of his laughter kept me going. I remembered Christmas Eve when he was just 6 years old. I had $20 to my name. $20. I skipped dinner for 3 nights straight, just so I could buy him that toy train he wanted so badly. When he tore open the wrapping paper, his little eyes lit up like fireworks. He hugged me so tightly and whispered, "You're the best mom in the world." That moment fed me more than any meal ever could. I remembered the winters when the heater broke and I'd pretend it was an adventure, bundling us both up in blankets, turning it into a game so he wouldn't feel the cold seeping through the walls. I remembered standing in the rain at bus stops, clutching my work uniform, praying no one would notice the holes in my shoes, while I saved every spare dollar to buy him books, to give him the education I never had. And through all of it, I never once complained, because he was my world, because I believed that love, real love, meant sacrifice. And yet now, after all of that, I was told I wasn't part of the real family. The injustice stung so sharply I could barely breathe. How could the same boy whose scraped knees I kissed, whose fears I chased away with bedtime stories, now treat me like an outsider at my own table of memories? I thought love was enough, but maybe it was never enough for them. That night, I sat in the dark, staring at the twinkling lights on my tree. They flickered so brightly, but to me, they felt hollow, like ornaments without meaning, like a celebration without joy. And slowly, I began to understand something. It wasn't just Christmas. It had never been just Christmas. It was the years of little cuts and dismissals. The way my son would sigh when I offered advice, as if my words were old and useless. The way my daughter-in-law's eyes scanned me up and down whenever I walked into their house. Her smile polite, but her gaze sharp, calculating, as if I were some stranger who didn't belong. It was the way invitations came late, or sometimes not at all. The way they never asked if I was okay, if I needed anything, as though my purpose had ended the day my son grew up. And for too long, I told myself, this is just how families are. Be patient. Don't make waves. I swallowed the hurt. I smiled through the pain. I became the doormat they wiped their feet on, all because I believed love meant enduring anything. But as I sat there, that night, surrounded by the quiet hum of loneliness, a different thought crept into my heart. What if love wasn't about enduring abuse? What if respect wasn't something I had to beg for? What if, for once in my life, I chose myself? The realization hit me like a wave. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't some fragile, discarded woman. No, I was stronger than they ever imagined. And maybe, just maybe, it was time they finally learned it. People often looked at me and saw nothing more than a tired, middle-aged woman. Someone who wore the same winter coat year after year. Someone who never boasted about money or accomplishments. Someone they could overlook. And maybe that was my greatest strength. Because what my son and his wife never cared to ask was how I survived all those years alone. They assumed I barely scraped by. They assumed that while they were busy climbing their little ladders, I was standing still, waiting for their scraps of affection. But the truth? While they looked down on me, I was quietly building. Every overtime paycheck, every extra shift I worked in those early years, I put something aside. Not much at first, just a few dollars here and there. But I learned, I studied, I read every book I could on saving, on investing. And when the time was right, I made my first move. A small apartment downtown. I fixed it up myself, renting it out to students. One property turned into two. 2 turned into 4. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy, but it was steady. And do you know where my son and his wife live now? That pretty little suburban house with the manicured lawn, the one they brag about to their friends? That's my house. I bought it years ago. The mortgage, the deed, it's all in my name. They pay me rent, though they don't like to think about it. They act like it's theirs, like they built it, like they earned it. But every brick, every beam belongs to me. So when my son told me I wasn't part of his real family, he said it from within walls that I own, from under a roof that my sacrifice provided, and suddenly the balance shifted. For the first time, I realized they had treated me like a powerless outsider. But in reality, I held the one thing they could never imagine: control. I could take it all away with a single piece of paper, a single signature. And just like that, the plan began to take shape. Once the truth settled in my heart, I knew I couldn't just sit in silence anymore. Not this time. So the very next morning, I made a call. Not to my son, not to my daughter-in-law, but to my lawyer. His voice was calm, steady, professional. Yes, you have every right. You're the owner. The tenants, even if they're family, must respect the terms. If they don't, you can evict them. Evict them. The word felt heavy, sharp, almost cruel. But then I remembered my son's voice, cold and dismissive. The real family. I remembered the way my daughter-in-law looked at me as if I were nothing. And suddenly, the word didn't feel cruel. It felt just. So I began to gather everything. I pulled out the dusty box where I kept my papers, each folder neatly labeled. The original deed to the house, the rental agreements they signed back when they first moved in, receipts for every repair, every tax payment, every dime I had poured into maintaining that home. Each document was like a weapon being sharpened, not for revenge born of hate, but for justice born of survival. For the first time in years, my hands didn't tremble. They moved with certainty, with purpose. I stacked the papers neatly in a folder, the edges crisp, the evidence undeniable. And as I closed it, I felt a calmness I hadn't known in years. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about finally teaching them the lesson they had forced me to learn over decades, that actions have consequences. And this Christmas, they were about to receive a gift they would never forget. Christmas Eve arrived. The world outside sparkled with warmth, houses glowing with lights, carolers passing by, laughter spilling from families gathered together. But inside my home, it was quiet. Too quiet. The table was set. A roasted chicken sat in the center, small, humble, but made with care. The good china glimmered under the candlelight. Stockings hung neatly on the mantel, though no eager little hands would tug at them in the morning. I sat down alone. The chair across from me remained empty. So did the ones beside it. I picked up my glass, whispered Merry Christmas to no one, and let the silence answer back. At one point, my neighbors knocked. Sweet people, they knew I lived alone. "Come join us," they said, their voices filled with kindness. But I shook my head, thanked them, and closed the door gently. I wasn't ready to smile at strangers. Not tonight. No, tonight I chose the silence. Because in the silence, the pain was sharp, real, and I needed to feel it. I needed to remember every moment of loneliness, every sting of exclusion, every careless word that had told me I was unwanted. I let the tears fall. Not soft tears, but deep, heaving sobs that shook through me until my chest ached. And then, slowly, the crying stopped. I wiped my face, pushed the untouched food away, and turned toward the folder sitting neatly on the sideboard. Inside, it was not just paper. It was my power, my voice, my justice. I ran my hand over the cover, feeling the weight of it. They had chosen to erase me from their Christmas. But tomorrow, I would make sure they never erased me from their lives again. And with that thought, I blew out the candle and sat in the dark, the plan burning brighter than any light around me. Christmas morning arrived colder than I could remember. The streets were alive, children in bright scarves pulling sleds, families carrying gifts, music floating from open windows. I drove slowly, my hands tight on the steering wheel, until I turned the corner and saw it. My son's house, my house. The driveway was overflowing with cars. The yard twinkled with lights. Through the frosted windows, I could see shadows moving, people laughing, hugging, clinking glasses. And then I heard it. Laughter. Pure, unrestrained laughter. It stung like a knife. That sound used to fill my home. That used to be my Christmas. I parked down the street, sitting there for a long moment, watching from a distance. My chest ached as I imagined what was happening inside. Gifts being torn open, my grandchildren squealing with joy, my son lifting a glass in a toast. A toast I was never invited to share. For a moment, I almost turned back. The weight of that loneliness pressed down on me so hard I could barely breathe. But then I looked down. Resting on the seat beside me was the folder, thick, heavy, filled with every document that proved the truth. The deed, the agreements, the eviction notice my lawyer had prepared. I picked it up, held it against my chest like a shield. The pain in my heart was still there, but it was sharper now, focused. It reminded me that this was not just about one Christmas. It was about years of being pushed aside, about being treated as less than, when I had been the very foundation beneath their feet. I stepped out of the car, folder tucked firmly under my arm. With each step toward that glowing house, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and strength. They didn't want me inside. But today, I wasn't coming as the unwanted mother. I was coming as the owner, the one with the power to decide who truly belonged here. And as I reached the front door, I whispered to myself, "Merry Christmas." Then I knocked. The knock echoed louder than I intended. Inside, I heard the laughter fade, voices quieting until there was only the shuffle of footsteps approaching. The door opened, and there she was, my daughter-in-law. Her smile faltered the instant she saw me. "Oh," she said, her voice sharp, cutting. "We didn't expect you." The words weren't just a greeting. They were a wall, a reminder, you don't belong here. For a moment, my throat tightened. I could have turned away. I could have let the rejection crush me again. But instead, I smiled. Calm, steady. "I know," I replied softly. "You weren't expecting me, but I had something important to bring." Her eyes flicked down to the folder in my hands. Suspicion clouded her face. My son appeared behind her. He froze when he saw me. His expression was a strange mixture of guilt and annoyance. "Mom, this isn't a good time," he said, glancing nervously over his shoulder at the party inside. The sound of my grandchildren giggling in the background twisted my heart. I took a slow breath, grounding myself. Every nerve in my body screamed with hurt, but my voice stayed even, almost gentle. "I won't take much of your time," I told him. "I just thought it would be best to handle this matter face to face." The silence that followed was thick. I could feel their unease growing with every second I stood there. Behind them, the living room was full, family and friends staring curiously, wondering why the woman they thought was forgotten was standing at the door on Christmas Day. I straightened my shoulders, clutching the folder a little tighter. This was the moment, the shift. I wasn't here as a mother begging for a place at the table. I was here as the woman who owned the very roof over their heads. And though my voice was calm, inside I could feel the storm building. My son stepped forward, his hand half raising as if to block me from crossing the threshold. "Mom," he said firmly, "this is our Christmas. You shouldn't have come. We just want to enjoy the day with our family." The words pierced deeper than he knew. Our family. as if I hadn't carried him through nights of fever, as if I hadn't worked double shifts to put food on that very table behind him. For a moment, my lips trembled. But then, silence. I steadied my breath, lifted my chin, and said quietly, "Just give me a few minutes. That's all I ask." He hesitated, glancing at his wife. She rolled her eyes, whispering something sharp under her breath, but he finally stepped aside, letting me stand in the doorway. The room was still. Every eye was on me. The laughter that had filled the air moments ago had been replaced with a thick, uneasy quiet. I placed the folder gently on the entryway table, sliding the clasp open with deliberate care. The sound, click, echoed through the silence. My daughter-in-law's smirk faltered. My son shifted uneasily, arms crossed over his chest. I didn't rush. I let the weight of the moment grow heavy. Page by page, I pulled out documents, deeds, rental agreements, signatures in ink. "This," I said, my voice calm but cold, "isn't just a house. It's my house. The roof you live under, the walls around your children, the mortgage you never had to pay because I paid it. Quietly, consistently, while you lived your life as though it was all yours." The color drained from my son's face. His wife's mouth opened, but no words came. I looked at them both, holding the papers in my hand. "You told me I wasn't part of your family. But the truth is, without me, you wouldn't even have a home to celebrate in." And with that, I laid the eviction notice on top of the pile, the paper landing with a final, undeniable thud. The papers lay between us, a quiet mountain of truth that no one could ignore. I looked directly at my son. My voice was steady, measured. "This house? It's mine. I've let you stay here out of love, but love doesn't look like this." A sharp gasp filled the room. My daughter-in-law's face flushed red. She snatched up one of the documents with trembling fingers, scanning it desperately. As if somehow the words on the page might rearrange themselves into the story she wanted to believe. This isn't possible," she stammered. "This has to be some mistake." But it wasn't. The deeds, the rental agreements, the notarized signatures, they were undeniable. My son stood frozen, his mouth half open. He looked like a boy again, caught, ashamed, unsure of what to say. For once, he had no words. I let the silence stretch. Their panic filled the air while I remained still, calm, unshaken. "You wanted a Christmas without me," I continued softly, my eyes fixed on him. "You said I didn't belong, but the truth is, none of this belongs to you." The contrast was stark, my quiet, measured tone against their rising hysteria. The daughter-in-law's voice cracked, almost shrill now. "You can't do this to us. The kids, they need stability. You'll ruin everything." Tears welled in my son's eyes. "Mom, please, tell me this isn't real." I pressed my hand gently on the stack of papers, steadying them. "It's very real, and for years I've given you stability, security, comfort. But what I've received in return is rejection, disrespect, and cruelty." Their voices overlapped now, pleading, panicked, desperate. And yet, I felt nothing but clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one shrinking, apologizing, waiting to be accepted. I was the one setting the terms. The papers had spoken. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. A few days later, the lawyer's letter arrived. 30 days. That was all they had before the legal process began. 30 days to confront a reality they had ignored for decades. I watched from my own home as panic settled over them like a storm. Phone calls, frantic texts, whispered arguments, they were everywhere, but none of it reached me. My son called, his voice breaking. "Mom, please, can't we just work something out?" I shook my head, my heart heavy but resolute. "I've already worked for years to give you everything you've ever needed. Now it's time you take responsibility for yourselves." My daughter-in-law tried reasoning, her voice rising in desperation. Think of the children. How can you be so cruel? I took a deep breath, steady, calm. I am not cruel. I am finally fair. Love doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. Love doesn't mean erasing boundaries. Love means teaching responsibility, even if it hurts. Behind me, I could hear the chaos through the thin walls. My son pacing, my daughter-in-law pleading, the children confused, wondering why Christmas felt like a battlefield instead of joy. I didn't linger. I turned quietly toward the door, my coat over my arm, my heart lighter than it had been in years. Each step was deliberate, measured. I was leaving behind fear, frustration, and the weight of being overlooked. Outside, the snow fell gently on the streets, covering the world in a quiet calm. I breathed in the cold, crisp air, savoring it. For the first time in decades, I felt a freedom that no argument, no manipulation, no rejection could take away. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their gratitude. I needed only to honor myself, and finally, I was doing it. Behind me, the family was still scrambling. Behind me, the walls echoed with panic and disbelief, and I walked away, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in peace. Because some lessons are only learned when the heart is no longer available to be walked on. Some truths are only seen when boundaries are finally drawn. And some Christmases are remembered not for what you were given, but for the strength you finally claimed for yourself. Sitting by the window that evening, I watched the last of the Christmas lights twinkle in the fading dusk. The world seemed quiet now, almost serene, as if it too had taken a breath after the storm. I thought about all those years of giving, of bending, of putting others first. I thought about the sacrifices no one ever noticed, the long nights at work, the skipped meals so my children could eat, the holidays spent worrying more about smiles than my own happiness. And yet, here I was, standing firm, choosing myself. Revenge? It's a word that tastes bitter on the tongue. But what I felt wasn't bitterness. It wasn't anger. It wasn't gloating. It was clarity. It was justice. Finally measured, finally fair, finally mine. I had spent decades invisible, overlooked, dismissed. But in that moment, I was seen. Not for what I had done for them, but for who I was and what I would no longer tolerate. I realized then that self-respect isn't loud. It isn't vengeful. It is quiet, firm, unshakable. And sometimes it is the only gift worth giving yourself. I allowed myself a small smile, the kind that comes from deep inside, a warmth that no rejection, no dismissal could ever steal again. Revenge wasn't sweet. It was necessary. It was justice. For once, I chose myself, and in that choice, I found peace. The new year arrived quietly, softly, like a gentle promise. I sat at a table not set by obligation, but by choice, surrounded by friends who truly cared, people who had shown up for me long before I demanded it. We laughed, shared stories, toasted to the small victories and the quiet resilience that had carried me through a storm I never thought I'd survive. The glow of candles reflected in their eyes, warm and sincere. For the first time in a long time, I felt entirely at home. I thought about the past, the loneliness, the disappointment, the sting of being overlooked. But instead of dwelling on what I had lost, I focused on what I had gained: independence, clarity, and a circle of people who truly valued me. I realized something essential. Family isn't defined by blood. It isn't measured by the obligations or expectations forced upon you. Family is who shows up at your table. Family is the love you give and receive freely, without conditions or manipulation. I raised my glass, a quiet smile tugging at my lips, to freedom, to self-respect, to the courage it takes to walk away from the love that doesn't see you and toward the love that does. This new year wasn't just another calendar change. It was the first chapter of a life rebuilt on my own terms, a life where I mattered, not because I was expected to, but because I chose to matter to myself. And in that choice, I found joy. I found peace. I found home.